Welcome to a Wonder Junkie podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Anderson.
Nobody knows what's going on. Nobody knows. Nobody has the faintest idea. The best guesses are lies. You may be sure of it.
All right, Kevin Kelly, thank you so much for joining me today. I appreciate you. Yeah, I've been following your work since about 2014, so a decent amount of time. And you've inspired me in so many ways, so I guess I'm a huge fan, and this is really an honor because you and Stuart Brand, I think, your good friend, have made me think differently, more than probably any two individuals. So,
Wow. Well, I'm honored. Tell me how that works. What happened?
well,
What did you change your mind about?
I love the Long Now Foundation. I've been following a lot of Stuart's work. And I love your recent book, Excellent Advice for Living.
Okay.
I read What Technology Wants. I read The Inevitable many years ago when you wrote that.
Okay.
But your 1,000 True Fans article is probably my favorite, to be honest, especially in this landscape.
Yeah.
And I reread your update on that too. I'm glad you put out a newer version of that. I always recommend it to people.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, that's actually where this podcast came from, and many other projects that I do. I try to focus now more on trying to be, like you said, the individual, the only, not the best.
Mm-hmm.
And that's inspirational to me. So I'd love to hear a little bit about the 1,000 True Fans article and maybe how you even got to write that piece. Because it really represents a lot of who you are and how you portray yourself in this world.
Yeah. Yeah. So the origins of it were back in the early 2000s. And I think I was talking to people about this new technology and how it was helping creators. And there was an article by Chris Anderson, who was my replacement at Wired, called The Long Tail. And the thesis of The Long Tail was that at the top of the curve, at the head, were these big mega blockbuster hits. And this is a graph of the sales. And so you have, millions buying this one. And then as you went down, people were buying, there were thousands of buying it. But at the very tail, there's people selling only one of something to an audience of one. And Chris's insight was that as an aggregator like Netflix, the total volume of the tail sales exceeded the hits. And that was kind of the premise of Netflix. So, yeah, we'll just have everything, and we don't need the hits. And I thought, well, that's really good advice for an aggregator, but it's not so good. It's not so much good news for a maker or creator because you're still selling one. And I began to think about, well, what would be a better number? Not everybody can sell millions, but maybe there's some number where with direct contact with the audience, you were able to short circuit the whole bestseller, platinum, blockbuster region. And so doing the math, I came up with the idea that with 1,000 true fans, super fans that bought everything you made that year, if you get $100 from them and you have 1,000 of them, then you'd have $100,000, which is not a fortune, but it's a livelihood. And so I started talking about that around, again, 2007 or something. And so I finally decided to write it down. And when I wrote it originally, it was really hard to find examples of anybody doing it. There were some artists who had moved from labels or publishers and were doing it on their own, bringing their audience with them. But there really wasn't anybody who was starting from the bottom. So I presented it as a theory, saying, in theory, you should be able to do this. And then later we had the tools like Kickstarter and Patreon, which came after that made it easier. And so now, of course, there's the whole creator economy. So the theory sort of proved correct. And there's I have lots of caveats in the thing. And the two central ones is that it's a full-time job taking care of your 1,000 fans. I mean, it's a lot of work, and there's a lot of artists who aren't suited for it or don't want to. They just want to paint or photograph or sculpt or record, and that's fine. Secondly, is that these are true fans, and so there's concentric circles of semi-true fans and other fans and casual fans, and so it's not just only the true fans that you have, and you can kind of do some of both, which is what I do. I have publishers depending on the project, but lastly, it's this idea that, and if you are a partnership, you need twice as many. I mean, two people. If you have a band, you need even more. But the final conclusion is that while it's not for everybody, it's the best place to start. Anybody can start there and see how far you get, and so it's very easy to begin with. And I recommend people start there if they don't have an audience, because having an audience is what matters. If you were to go to a New York publisher these days, they don't have an audience. The label music, they don't have an audience, and so when they look at your proposal, they're going to say, "Do you have an audience? Because we don't have an audience." So you need to have an audience, even if you want to go for the big publishers. So you might as well begin now to cultivate your audience and try and own it in some capacity, so you can bring it with you, even if you do a deal with a publisher or studio or label.
Yeah, no, I love it. And you've seemed to figure that out quite early. And I love how unique your work is. But you've lived quite an interesting life. I've listened to a lot of your interviews over the years with Tim Ferriss. Those early ones were really good. And it's like, I don't know that many people, you don't come across them in your average life that have done the stuff that you've done, and to think so differently. I'm curious, like when you started early on, who were the biggest influences that made you start having that unique ability to go, you know what, I'm going to buck the system. Maybe
Yeah.
I'll drop out of college and start traveling, because it seems like you're good at that.
The first influence was Henry David Thoreau. I read Walden in high school, and it's like, yeah, he was my hero. It's like, yeah, that's build my own house, go my own way. So he gave me some inspiration to do that. And then Stuart Brand and his catalog, which was the first one was issued right at the end of my high school, and I read that. Saw a copy at Woodstock, and it blew my mind. It was like, psh, I was a very isolated suburban kid in New Jersey. I had no contact with the world of things that were happening. I didn't live in California. I didn't have older brothers. I was just like, the libraries were pathetic. And so he was sort of like he said he gave permission to travel and do stuff and make your own do-it-yourself world. And here are the books, and here was the information you needed. This is very hard. I've been trying to convey to my kids how much of an information desert there was in the 1960s in the U.S., in the world. If you wanted to find out how to do something, there was simply no way. You wanted to learn how to repair a car. If you didn't have an older brother, where would you go? I mean, you could go to car school, I guess, if you wanted to learn how to pour some anything you can. I mean, anything. It was impossible to figure out where to buy the stuff, where to get the tools, where to get the supplies. None of that was there. And so the Whole Earth Catalog was the first little glimpse of ways how to drill a well, of how to keep bees, and they told you how, and that was just the beginning. It was the kind of the beginning of the internet on newsprint. And so that changed me tremendously. Just having the permission from other people who were living really fulfilled lives and very happy with that, to drop out and do my own thing, knowing that at least there are some people who were able to do it. So when I dropped out of college, I was signing up basically for like a life of poverty. I mean, that was the assumption was, but I was going to trade it for time. I had control of my time, and so that was the bargain. I'd rather have control of my time and making stuff on my own terms, even if I'll never have very much money to do it, because I learned in traveling that I had a kind of wealth that a lot of very rich travelers who were on organized tours would come by, and they would be going on this thing and they wouldn't stop. And I remember this older man um, who was on a big paid tour with porters and stuff, and he was talking to me, and he was saying, "Man, I envy you um, that you have timed what you're seeing. I wish I had that." And I was like, "Really? Okay." That was like, aha. He
Mm.
has money but doesn't have time, and so I want to be time wealthy, and I began to understand that money was usually not the limiting factor in what people wanted to do. There's a very famous scene in a movie, I think it's called Wall Street, I can't remember, where the character is commiserating. They're in the stock trading pit or something. It's crazy, it's terrible, high stress, hates the job. But he's telling someone, "Yeah, I'm working here to save up enough money, and then I'm going to quit. I'm going to ride my motorcycle across China." And the travelers within us laugh because you could work at McDonald's for 6 months and save enough money to ride a motorcycle across China. It doesn't take $1 billion. It takes $1,000, maybe. And so, yeah, you normally don't, money's usually not the gating factor for most of your dreams.
Hmm.
And so that's what I learned from um, very early on, when that, because I didn't have money, listening to Stewart and others in the Whole Earth catalog, which became something that I really kind of paid a lot of attention to, of people who were going a different way, deciding that having control over their lives was more important than having funds for their lives.
Yeah. And it seems like a lot of people that are very intelligent in that way say to live poor early so
Yeah,
that you don't have that scarcity mindset. And so you're not
right,
chasing the dollar because you realize you don't need much. Like
right.
you can live cheaply off food and basic fundamentals.
Yeah,
But
and for me that was a double lesson. Not only did I have not have any money and very little possessions, but I was traveling in places where the people there didn't have anything either, and I could see. I mean, I was richer than them, even though I
wow.
had just a backpack and a sleeping bag, um, and I was richer than them because I had knowledge. I mean, a lot of poverty is a kind of ignorance, really, and lack of imagination, and so that was a constant question: was traveling through these lands where they were very poor, very scarce resources. It's like, well, what are they missing? What is it? And again, it wasn't that they needed money; they actually needed imagination and knowledge, um, and willpower and decision to do certain things. And so, and that happened right before my eyes. I mean, and I saw these places transform themselves from very subsistent farming to some of the richest countries on the planet, richer than the U.S. at this point. And so
Amazing.
I saw that happen, and it wasn't because of money. They made the money in a certain sense.
Yeah. Yeah, you seem to have this ability to always be an optimist, but it's because you use your imagination and you use your
Right.
perspective of looking back long term. And I love that. You've definitely changed the way that I think forever because once you have that seed and you start to play with it, it's incredibly empowering for anybody. And I really do. I
Right. Right.
wonder what your thoughts are on the lack of perspective being the root of most suffering, right? It's like
Yeah.
just our inability to see things from a different angle. And
Yep.
so the unlocking of the imagination and the way to think back just 100 years. We were
Yep.
watching 1923 at work the other day, and geez, 100 years ago, you couldn't even conceive of one thing that we're doing right now, talking to people from all over the world. And
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
just,
Yeah.
yeah, So tell me
Yeah,
about your optimistic imagination.
yeah. I mean, and I think there are many reasons to be optimistic, but the central one in my mind is that we need optimists to make the future, and you to make this future full of all this kind of stuff we're talking about, AI and genetic engineering and the alternative mirror universe, omniverse, multiverse, where we track each other, ourselves all the time, and other things like that. All this confluence of all these things. If we want it to be a great place to live, if we want it to be a place that we want to live, we have to imagine how it works. We have to imagine the good case. We have to actually come up with the communicator from Star Trek, and which help us make a goal of making the iPhone. And we have to see it in our vision, and we have to believe that it's possible to get there. Otherwise, it's not going to happen accidentally. And so that imagining it and then believing that it's possible, and then of course making the steps to make it happen against all odds, that's optimism. And it's in the past, everything we have surrounded today that we like, from your stuff you're wearing on your head, your microphones, the lights, the screen, the walls in your house, were all made by optimists, by people who believed that these things could exist, should exist, when most people didn't believe that. And so I want to be one of the people who is making the future that we want. And you have to start with being optimistic about it.
Yeah. And I'm wondering what your contemplative practices have been throughout your years, because to be an optimist too, in my opinion, from my experience, is to count your blessings and take account for what's going right first, and just blow your own mind and go, you know what? I'm going to be the accountant, be grateful and feel lucky for what already I inherited just by being
Right,
born
right.
into this situation.
Yeah, I mean, another way of saying it is that you want to shift from a scarcity mindset to an abundant mindset, and that's a big step for many people. And some of it just because of the personalities, and others because of the very real life experience they've had in most of the world, for that matter. And so, but that switch is really important. And I think the abundance mindset is coming to say that, say, in the world of ideas, the world of creation, um, there's always more. That if you are unleashed from a job and you're producing things yourselves, you need to come to kind of a habit of making things on a regular basis. And when you do that, you realize that the origins are of a bottomless fountain. The more you do on a regular basis, the more you understand that it just there's no end to it. And what that does is that allows you to let go of things very easily, to share them very easily because you've got more ideas, or to abandon them very easily because you got more ideas. And so that generous spirit is part of optimism, knowing that you things gain in value when they're shared, things gain in value when they're collaborated, things gain in value when they're given away. And so um, part of optimism is understanding that the basic nature of the universe is abundance, and that humans are basically good, given all things being equal. You can trust them, and if you trust them, they give you their best. And so that kind of abundant mindset is really important for harnessing the full power of optimism. Um, it doesn't mean that you have to be stupid. Doesn't mean you can't patent things. It just means that you understand that the valence of the universe is that we have all that we need, that you yourself you've been provided what you need for the next step.
Yeah.
The next, everything you need for the next step is there. And if you go one step at a time, you will have what you need.
Yeah. I know a lot of the things that I'm realizing over time. I've listened to a lot of people. I just love learning. And I'm like, God, where did I get that idea from? Or where did I get this
Uh-huh.
perspective from? And I realize so many of them are actually from you. And I don't even know half the time where they come from. But I'm like, oh, shit, I think I did learn that from listening to Kevin Kelly. And one of them is when you talk repeatedly about when you have an idea, you don't want to create it. You don't want to have to go through the energy to get, so you're trying to give it away. And then finally you come to the place where you're like, all right, nobody's taking it, no one's doing it. So now you have that unique thing that you can take your time on. And I think
The
that's
only you,
incredible.
the only you can do.
Yeah. It's
Right.
almost
And
like you're
so
obligated.
at that point, yeah, right. Because you could be cheating us if you don't do it. That is the heavy. I haven't really thought about whether you have an obligation at the point to do it. There might be some of that. But there's certainly a sense that um, when I have gotten to that point, that's been my best work because I've already attempted to give it away many times. I've attempted to kill it. I've attempted to abandon it. But when I did it, it was only because I knew at that point that no one else is going to do it or could do it or
Mm,
appreciate it. And so, yeah, you want to be the only if all can. And that's a very high bar. That's a very high bar because it requires a fair amount of self knowledge, self awareness. And for me, it's taken most of my life to kind of arrive at some idea of what it is. And there are some special people who are born knowing, excuse me, what it is that they're a little different about, um, and going for that. But most people, it'll take most of their lives to kind of slowly gather the feedback from people around them, from customers, clients, employees, friends, family, that tell them, "Oh, I like what you're doing there. That's really cool. No one else is doing that. You're really good at that." And so over time, you begin to get a sense of what it is that you bring, what combination of things that you're bringing that most people aren't. And there are a couple of hints, and Tim Ferriss has one of these, which is like things that you find enjoyable doing repeatedly that others find tedious.
mm-hmm.
I know a lot of artists who love to spend hours and hours and days making these little strokes, which I would just blow. It would just make me crazy. They love it.
Yep.
They're doing it. Same thing with typing. I have writer friends who love just to make words, and they can go on for hours. I can't do that either. So things that you find tedious, other people, things that you've loved doing, other people find tedious is a good hint. You're in that. And another one is, if at all possible, you want to be working on things that there's no name for it. Because if there's a name for it, that means other people are doing it, and that's probably not what you want to be doing. Something where there's really no name for it. You're going to give the name for it. It's going to be something that hasn't been done by other people.
Yeah, it's hard to put you in a box too. I'd always wonder how I would. I'm going to read your bio before for the front end of this podcast because it's so dense. But you're like, what is it that makes you so unique,
Yeah, exactly,
right?
yeah, yeah. And so you kind of want to get to that point where, yeah, you're. It's like some of the we can all think of people who are artists who are like it's hard to describe what it is that they do. I just was watching last night, just randomly, John Wilson, How To. How To with John Wilson is like I can't even now describe exactly what he's doing. It's so peculiar, and that's
Perfect.
perfect. Yeah,
Yeah, that's what makes him special. And it
yeah,
seems like the more you can find not your true self, but the part of you that is unique, which all of us have. And it's
Yeah,
hard to do that in a world where you're forced into paying, your bills and there's scarcity and all that. But
right, right.
I've been blessed with the fire department as my like little golden handcuffs that gave me time early on 20 years ago. So I had 20 days off a month and I had food, shelter, water. And so I was like, okay, now I can start to do the whole like, what am I here for? And the deeper questions, the existential components, because you
Mhm.
could see the hamster wheel. Everyone, once in a while, you see it and you're like, that just looks like a trap, the matrix, and I'd rather be curious and to be inspired and to feel alive. And I
Mhm.
think curiosity seems to be the root of a happy life too, like one of the
Yeah,
major components to really rediscover
yeah.
that.
Curiosity and paying attention, noticing things. I think noticing, paying attention, curiosity. So like when you find yourself noticing something, I say pay attention to what you pay attention to.
Hmm.
When you're noticing something, it's important. A lot of people decide that it's not important what you're noticing, but one way to get kind of weird and different is to lean into that. You notice something, it's a thing. You can make a whole career out of that thing that you noticed, and many people do. They just kind of like the Jerry Seinfeld thing. He just noticed these little things, and that was his career. Someone else noticed something scientifically. They're so, oh, that's odd, and it's paying attention and following through with it, making it a habit. Those qualities, in addition to the curiosity, but you want to retain that childlike aspect of noticing, paying attention, being
Hmm.
curious, asking questions.
Yeah. Yeah, that childlike wonder. It keeps you hungry and happy and
Hmm. Hmm.
inspired by how weird the world actually is. It's like we can almost get that numbed out of us or beaten out of us in the institutions. And you forget that, oh, yeah, I
right,
look at that blade of grass or look at the soil or anything, and
right, right,
somebody has spent their whole life
right, right.
divulging into that, you
Well,
know?
and I think part of what has to happen is you have to be shown that that's a form of success. I mean, because people have trained by society to say you can't call it success unless you are on TV, unless your name is known among everybody, unless you're famous, unless you have $1 billion, unless there's some metrics about what success means. But that's part of the education that I was involved in, was shifting my idea of success to um, noticing something, you know, the way, like I'm thinking of Andy Goldsworthy, an artist who goes out every day into nature and arranges sticks or leaves in a pattern. He is a raging success in his own eyes. He succeeded in taking all the colored leaves in the fall and putting them into a spectrum on the ground.
Hmm.
That is his life. That's what he does. And he is content, or what's the word I want? Yeah,
Fulfilled.
he's content with that as his definition of success.
Hmm.
And that's a huge, huge, huge thing to get to, because many people would say he's wasting his life arranging flower petals. But he recast that act as that's success. Success is I can do it again tomorrow.
Yeah.
Okay. And so you have to, part of the education is redefining your idea of success. I like Brian Eno's um, term, which is you want to find a spot that you like, shove the arrows into the ground, and then paint a target around it. And and then you clear up. I hit the bullseye, right? I'm in.
Hmm.
It's like This is successful.
I like
You
that.
kind of like whatever I'm doing the thing, and now I am successful. And so redefining success is a big part of this education.
It's probably a lot of letting go, truly, if you can practice of what people think. I mean, it's like
Yeah,
that's one of the
right.
great challenges of this life.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Because people think, well, you have to be a lawyer with two houses, and I very early on said, no, that's not success for me. Success for me might be building a shack by hand, or having making art every day for a year or whatever. That was success.
Yeah. So I'm curious about the idea of meaning making machines. That seems to be a big part of the human experience. And I've heard you mention that language is technology. It was one of the most profound that we've created. And it gives us this ability to transmit these ideas through space time, through vibration and sound and writing. But internally, I'm always thinking like how much language has impacted my inner world. And meaning making seems to me to be like, because I'm always looking at how do we mitigate suffering, because I see such a scale
Mm-hmm.
of it in my career and in my life. So I'm like, well, what is the most, if I could triage and get to the root of it, a big one is meaning making and like restructuring narratives that are most true and most opportunistic. And I think that's a superpower of ours. And I think it is a part of our usefulness of the technology. But I'm curious because that's like why you write a lot of times like this advice for your kids. And
Yeah.
I can take that book and show a friend, and any page in that book's going to give them a little nugget,
Mm-hmm.
and it can give them almost a dopamine hit, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
and a
Mm-hmm.
perspective shift that's lifelong lasting.
Yeah, meaning making. I think I think you're right about its importance. What I don't have a ready answer for is um, a pat way of doing it. I think I think it's again like knowing what you're good at. I think it takes all our life to do that. I, I have a koan. If you've heard of koans in Buddhism or
Mm-hmm.
Japanese Zen, where it's kind of like a riddle, and you're supposed to get enlightenment. So my riddle is that the purpose of your life is to figure out the purpose of your life. I mean, it seems to me it's like you spend all your life trying to figure out what your purpose and what your meaning is, and that is the meaning.
Yeah.
That is the assignment, is just to figure it out, and maybe you're dead when you figure it out. I don't know, but so I think it's a lifelong thing about making meaning. I don't think it
Mm.
happens just kind of once. I think it's a process, a direction rather than a destiny. And so you kind of want to be meaningful your life. You're constantly trying to make it have meaning, and I think it's something that's a process that's ongoing all the time. Can technology help? Yes, I think it can. And the example I use is that we have talents that were mixtures of talents and skills that we're born with that need technology to be able to surface and to realize it. And the more technology we have, the more chance there is that whatever talents you have can be made manifest with that. So like I've used this example many times, but just imagining um, if Van Gogh had been born before we invented cheap oil paints, and the loss to him
Mm.
and to the world, or Mozart before we invented the symphony. So those technological inventions allowed their genius to be flourished and shared. And that means that today, somewhere in the world, there is a young girl who's waiting for us to develop the technology for her genius. So she's the Shakespeare of the time.
Mm.
We need, we want to make more possibilities to make sure that everybody can discover and share and develop their genius with everyone. Um, for me, when I discovered photography, that was a big thing. And what if I'd been born before photography? It'd be hoeing potatoes, and it'd be pretty tough to share my genius with potatoes. But by the same token, there might have been other things in the future that I would have been even more suited for. That'll be a loss to me
Yeah.
and to them.
Yeah. And who knows? I always think like, Wade Davis, I'm sure.
Yeah.
I love his work and the way he thinks because he's been everywhere, sort of like you in a different way, but he knows so much about culture and
Mhm.
how to describe it in ways that's changed the way that I think
For
forever.
sure.
Because I'm always
Yeah.
now thinking about travel must be the most mind expanding thing we can do.
Yes, it
And
is.
so is reading, and so is learning online because it's the same thing as travel. You're taking yourself and you're going on a trip, and then you're changing the way you think. But when you see other cultures, do you ever wonder what would happen if, say, we had a cataclysmic event, we wiped everything out, and we had to
Mhm.
restart and reemerge?
Well,
How different technology would reemerge each time, or do you think there's a cyclical pattern of similarity?
actually, I think there is a similarity of progression, and I did a study of the evolution of technologies on different continents in prehistory when they were separated. Discovery of like pottery, dogs, domestication, sewing, and stuff, and there was a general same sequence. I mean, to rough order.
Mm,
So um, it depends on how much we knew. Like if we were rediscovering, if everything was forgotten and we were rediscovering it, I think we. I mean, and it also depends on whether it was any evidence of stuff from the past. But if you're doing the classic Stephen Jay Gold, excuse me, experiment of like rerunning the tape of life on a similar planet, well, clean slate, I think the sequence would be very similar to what we've done,
mm,
given our natural resources, which means that I think there is some inherent biases in the Technium. I think the Technium has its own tendencies and biases shaping certain things. AIs are inevitable. Minds were pretty inevitable in evolution on this planet. There was independently created many, many times. The same with the eyeball. So kind of wanted to do that. Um,
hmm.
so we do have to pay. We do want to listen to the technology to hear where it's biased in certain directions, and rather than trying to go against the grain. AIs want to learn. LLMs want to learn, but they're also lazy. That's one of the things we've learned about the LLMs is that they're they're lazy, and so they know better answers, but they just have to be nudged and prodded to get them to spend more time and give you a better answer. Um,
Hmm.
that's what you know. There's a skill. There's skills in using and collaborating with AIs. Some people are much better at it because they have their 10,000 hours. And I was making daily art a couple of years ago with the AIs, and there are some artists today who I have no idea how they do it using the same tools.
Amazing.
They've spent 10,000 more hours than I have doing it. And
Wow.
it's the same with prompting, asking questions, doing research. So there is a skill, an aptitude, AI whispering attitude, and so even if you're not going to be replaced by an AI, but you may be replaced by a human who uses AI better than you do.
Yeah. What do you think the most evolved, if we were going to keep going into the next 10, 20 years, do you think it's more important now to unlearn faster and to
Mm.
relearn better than clinging to information, obviously, like we used to? Now it's almost more important to be able to unlearn and rethink things really fast.
Yes. Um, if you want a question, you're going to ask a machine. If you want to, if you want to answer, you're going to ask a machine. If you want a question, you'll ask a educated person. So questions become more valuable. But
Hmm.
it is true that we need to unlearn things, and one of the biggest hurdles for thinking about the future is forgetting what we think the future should be. I was involved in hundreds of different scenarios over the years with the business, the scenario business with Fortune 500 companies. Um, Never once was the scenario of today, of April 2005, ever conceived. It was just impossible to imagine, because we had ideas about what the future was, and it did not include, a madman making president doing tariffs at the scale of what it was. That it was just seemed, if you told anybody that scenario 20 years ago, they'd simply would say it's impossible. It was not going to happen. Yeah. So we have to unlearn. We have to kind of forget what we think the future is going to be, in that way. But I do also think that the chief skill that people should have when they're young, especially, is very fine-grained knowledge about how they learn best. Is a lot of self-knowledge about exactly how you learn the best, whether it's a new language or new physical skill, whether you're audio or visually, or you need to work with the guide, with the trainer, or with the coach, or the teacher to optimize your learning, because that's the main thing you're going to be doing the rest of your life, is just learning new stuff. So you should get really good at it. And that's not taught anywhere that I know.
Yeah, that seems like the most important thing to consider is the gnosis model of like, how do I approach this world the best? How do I leverage my consciousness into this environment best?
How do I learn the best? And I don't know that. Tim Ferriss might, but I don't.
He's a hacker like that. What technology wants, and the Technium, those terms for people, because I think I'm going to be exposing you to a lot of people who have never come across your work, and I'm imagining it'll be nice to give them a little bit of a scaffolding of like what inspired you to write that, and what is the Technium, and also I just have another thing I don't want to forget is incentives dictating outcomes, and how our whole technological ecosystem is driven in a certain direction at an exponential rate based on the incentivization structure. And if that were to be flipped, imagine how different things could be, or if it was to just be changing what those incentives are.
That's a lot of questions.
Yeah.
I'm going to start with just the simple one of the Technium.
Mm-hmm.
And where it came from. So let me describe what it is first and where it came from. So my definition of the Technium is that it's the system of all the technologies that we have that are codependent on each other. So like, to make a saw today, you need to have hammers to make the blade, and then to make hammers you need saws to cut the wood. You need computers to do almost anything. You need milling machines and whatnots to make the chips to make the computers. And so you have this ecosystem, like a rainforest or a meadow of all the different technologies, and they kind of are dependent on each other for what they make and to be. And that whole thing expanded to including all the stuff that we make, including cities. I give the name the Technium. And some people could call it maybe culture, but I think the Technium or the technosphere is more apt, because I'm suggesting that there is an agency, tendencies within the system itself that are great, that are not found in any technology. So this pair of glasses is some kind of technology. It has no real agency. But together with all the things that the machines that make these and the machines that make the machines and everything else together, that has sufficient complexity, like an ecosystem or a rainforest, that there are some general tendencies in it. There's a certain grain. There's a certain way it wants to lean. And I call that the Technium. And that's what the Technium is. It's the system of everything that we've invented with our minds, connected together, and it has an agenda that's just outside of us. I mean, it's independent of us. And I came to that conclusion because I was trying to write a book about theories of technology. We have a theory of biology, And before Darwin came along, which is the theory of biology, is basically it's evolution. It's based on evolution. Everything kind of is explained through evolution. But before Darwin came along and Russell to offer the theory of evolution, biology was just one organism after another. People had cabinets full of weird stuff, and there wasn't any really way to understand them together. And that's sort of our theory of that's what technology was. This is a parade of one invention after another. There was no theory connecting it. And the Technium was part of my theory, saying that actually technology is an outgrowth of evolution, that it follows the same exotropic self-organizing thread that we see in life and evolution, and that it's obeying the same general dynamics. It's just accelerated. And that you could think of technology as not like against nature, but as an extension of nature. And so that's its origin, was trying to make a proto theory of technology.
So it basically, technology is nature. It's just
Yes.
it's just part of everything, and it's a manifestation of us, and then we create it, and then it shapes us, which is a symbiotic relationship
Right.
that continues on in its own relationship, I suppose.
And that's why I don't think technology is anti-nature. We've never made a technology that we couldn't make a greener version of it. So it's just that we want to design and have it help us design the greenest versions of things. So it's not inherently that. It's just that we have to choose to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, I had Jeffrey West on here talking about scale, and I love his ideas about the cities. And I live in a big city, but I always am downtown for sunset at night. And you look at the city, and it's like, this is such a cool living organism, really. It's just like a desert, but a different version. And a lot of people look at it with a different lens of, this is bad, it's polluting the air and all this stuff. And it's easy to get caught up in that, but it's really, to me, lack of perspective again. It's just, we need to shift the way we relate to it, you know?
Right, exactly.
The next piece of that we were getting into was basically incentivization structures and how...
incentivization, yeah. I think the market is one of the most powerful things we have. I don't think we don't talk enough about things that the market can't do, because there's lots of things the market can't do. And that's a role for government in making up for the things that markets can't do. There may be other things. We have nonprofits and other kind of organizations that are not government that are also trying to do the things that market can't do. And it's possible in the future, with the aid of technology, we can have other institutions that also will do good things without the market. Like the Internet Archive is a tremendous example. Wikipedia. I've been agitating for something I call public intelligence, which is an AI commons, where we have an AI that's not owned by corporations, that is a public utility. It's trained on all the languages and texts of the world, all of them, without copyright concerns. And that's open and public to anybody who wants to use it or contribute intelligence into it. So there are things, but however, I think the dominant mechanism will be market driven, and the incentives there is often profit. And so we just have to be creative in mixing and matching those the self-interested aspect of the marketplace and the community center interests of some alternatives.
Yeah. Well, it's very fascinating, because sometimes it's unfortunate to see how scaled these incentives are. And that's my only short-term pessimism. I think you've talked about that. It's like, oh, are we going to go off the rails here before we can get it back on? And it's like, well, I think like always, long term, we find out new solutions and we figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah,
yeah, the incentives just seem a little crazy right now.
they're being tested right now as we speak. Those
Yeah.
incentives for the stock market profits are they're quite. People will have to will have a chance to re-examine their incentives.
Yeah. Yeah, big time. This is a very interesting time. Like, I feel like in the next few years, we're going to see more change than we could even ever conceive of.
Yeah, disruption is there's disruption, and you want a positive change. It could also go wrong too.
Yeah. I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about AI because you've been in tech for so many years, and now we have a lot of younger people. I know a couple people in their early 20s, and they're super genius with this stuff, but
Mm-hmm.
they don't have the long-term perspectives that you have. So, what do you even think about AI? Like, what is your way of even describing what you think it's going to be like in the next 5, 10 years?
So I always want to start with insisting that we talk about AIs, plural.
AIs, yeah.
There'll be thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of different species of AIs doing different things, just like we have many kinds of machines in our industrial world, and not just the machine. There's motors, and
Mm,
here there's levers, there's tons. I'm surrounded by all kinds of machines, and each of them have their own interface, their own way of being regulated, whatnot. So there'll be tons and tons of different AIs doing different things, engineered for different stuff. I don't think there's such a thing as a general purpose AI, or there could be, but it's not going to be any more useful than a Swiss Army knife is.
hmm,
And um, so, I think the way to think about these different AIs is as alien intelligence, artificial aliens, and they may have all kinds of levels of emotion, maybe even sentience, all kinds of levels of intelligence, which is not a single dimension. It's more like a compound rather than an element. And we'll engineer them for doing different things because they don't think like humans. And that's their main attraction, is that they do not think like we think. And that's why we're going to make them, so together we can solve things that we can't do with humans alone, or make things that we can't make. And um, so I see this world of artificial aliens, um, full of different kind of AI minds of various kinds, and uh, I think that they're going to mostly augment human rather than replace humans. Although it could be wrong, but that's my assumption. That's what I'm. That's the evidence so far. The evidence so far is that almost nobody's been fired because of AI, and so I think we'll continue in that direction of generally having augmented help, co-creation, people working with these who are very good, having multiple kinds of AIs, and having very close relationships with some of them. Most of the AI stuff is going to be like plumbing. It's going to be 99% in the back, hidden from us. We never see it. It's just working day and night until it stops. Some of the AI will be front facing, and it'll probably be more humanoid because that makes us comfortable. They can have strong emotions. We'll have emotional bonding to some of them.
hmm,
Um, a lot of them will be what I call dumb smarten, meaning that they'll be incredibly smart in one dimension and incredibly stupid in another, and we'll just be frustrated with the dumb smarten. How could you know that but not know that? And so
mm,
I think it's uh, we're making kind of an ecosystem, a rainforest of all these different intelligences and various laws and ways that we regulate them and interface with them. Some people will be really good with them and others won't. There'll be some people who, the Amish or whatever, who decide that they want nothing to do with them, and that's fine too.
Mm.
So I see kind of a world where there's lots of varieties, some very integrated and some mostly invisible, and people kind of coming up to new relationships with them in a very close way, where they're kind of working with some agents all the time, day and night, or at least while they're awake, I should say, and becoming like a team, very, very partnered to it. There'll be concerns about addictions and dependencies, which I think will be legitimate. But we are kind of we can become very comfortable with things that we're dependent on, technologies that we can't see without, technologies that we won't be able to work without. We were long ago past the point where we're dependent on technology for our existence, and AIs will go in that direction too. So there will be people who really will need their AI to get things done, and that'll be like, well, okay, let's make sure the AIs are always there, just like a couple times a year when electricity goes out in the city, it's like nothing happens, and people are like, wow, I didn't realize how dependent we are on it. Yes, let's make sure electricity never goes out. It's very simple. Let's make sure the AI does not turn off. And interestingly, the internet as a whole has never gone down.
Yeah. I wonder if it will, eventually.
I think it's actually hard. It's engineered to be so redundant that it would actually be hard to take it down, even if that was your job. I've made this little kind of science fiction short story sketch where the smartest people in the world are trying to take the internet down and how difficult it is. It's really, really hard. So AI might be something like that. There might be a public intelligence that's a large scale, planetary size, that is always on, never down, and you just want to make sure you have access to it. So that's possible.
Yeah. What are you working on now? What's your next project, or what's your focus been on, your attention?
I'm working on 100-year desirable future, scenarios for 100 years of a future with 10-year increments of a future I want to live in. That's part of this agenda of having an optimistic view. So, and I'm trying to fill in the little curious things in between that if we could have this in 50 years, we should be able to have this at the same time. So that's the hard thing.
Yeah.
And it's not a book. Excuse me. It's not a book. It's more of a database that I'm going to make available for writers to write stories in.
Fascinating.
Kind of a world building exercise more than anything.
Very cool. Sounds exciting. I know you got to get going here, so I just want to be respectful. If you were going to die today and no one could read any of your books, they didn't have access to everything you've created, what would you want to share with the world?
Well, let me see the assignment. I'm going to die, but my books are left, or there's no books.
Basically, there's not a trace of you on the internet other than this statement here, what you're going to say.
Oh, I see. Yeah. Yeah, I guess I would say something along the lines of, don't aim to be the best, try to be the only.
I love that.
My advice. So it's actually, others have said it, and it's not my invention, but I'm echoing it.
Yeah, I appreciate it, man. It's really fun to chat with you, and thanks for your time today.
You're most welcome.
Absolutely. Thank you for listening to the episode. Be sure to subscribe to the show on Spotify, YouTube, and iTunes, and rate the show. I hope you enjoyed the episode.
What we call reality is in fact nothing more than a culturally sanctioned and linguistically reinforced hallucination.